Leadership is taking people on a journey where there's a vision, guidance and purpose.
Good leaders lead with the heart as well as the head.
Leadership means doing the right thing for the right reason, no matter how difficult it might be.
You're listening to Leadership Unwrapped, a podcast where you will hear from people who are living leadership every day. So, Niamh, I think our listeners will really enjoy this conversation with Michelle Stowe. I'd wanted to meet her for a long time because I'm really interested in the restorative practice piece. And as you know, we've worked on restorative practice approaches at work too. We're hoping that it'll support our students when they bring out to school. So to actually meet someone who's so passionate about it and to get a deeper understanding of how she approaches restorative practice as a way of being, really, not a technique, but really as a meaningful way of being with people. Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation with her.
Yeah, it's almost hard to describe what it was like sitting down with her, isn't it? Because she really embodies it. She really embodies this whole restorative way of being, exactly as you've put it, just in everything that she says and everything that she does. She could barely get rid of us by the end of the conversation.
There's a very strong values base, but it's also very humanistic, it's kind, and she really sees people, and maybe some of the challenges behind why behaviour would be the way it is. She never loses sight of just that person and being able to stay connected to the person. And I think that's really what we need to do in a very changing world. So I just think there's something huge in what she's doing.
Yeah, and it's relevant. I mean, lots of our listeners, of course, may be familiar with restorative practice from engaging with it in schools or in different workplaces. But I think regardless, as you said, that piece around having the connection front and centre and almost an understanding that all of our actions and interactions stem from somewhere, and it's about getting to that piece and healing that. So I think it's relevant for all of us, definitely.
Yeah. And also maybe we should say to the listeners, if they want to hear more and they want to meet Michelle, she's got a conference coming up on the 14th of September, and it's a Restorative Practice Conference of Rest and Play, and it's in the beautiful Belmont Domain in County Wicklow. I've never been, so I'm looking forward to that. And really it's focused on relationships, interconnectedness, getting some time to think about our inner landscape and to walk and to maybe ask some questions in community with each other. And it's very much that values-based, kind of humanistic restorative practice. So if people are interested, it's at a weekend, 14th of September, and it's connectrp.ie.
Yeah, we can put that in the bio as well, and we'll be there. I'm really looking forward to it. I can't wait. Yeah.
So we'll hope you enjoy, listeners. So we're sitting here today with Michelle Stowe, and I want to start by saying we have wanted to do this for such a long time, so I'm so delighted to be with you. Thank you, Michelle.
Oh, I'm absolutely thrilled to Patricia and Niamh. We've had a great chat already over a cup of tea, so I'm really looking forward to it today. Thanks so much for inviting me to share.
That's brilliant, thank you. And we have spent time following your work, and I know we've met at different conferences and different things, so I guess we're the way that you work and the way that you think resonates very well with the way that we think about leadership. So we're really interested to have that conversation with you today. So by way of introduction, Michelle is the director of Connect Restorative Practice, Connect RP, and she's working mostly with schools to embed restorative practice in schools and to enhance school culture. And Michelle's approach to restorative practice, which I think we'll talk about over the conversation today, is deeply humanistic, and it's certainly not a tick the box exercise of what you do, but it's a lived way of working that's present and relational, and I'm very excited to talk more about that. And Michelle talks about honouring the values of restorative practice, particularly community, empathy, connection and relationships. And over the course of our conversation, we spoke about the importance of co-creating relational learning communities as core to the work that you do. So I think this is really important for culture change and for much healthier relationships as we engage in learning. So we're delighted that you've said yes to us to take the time to talk to us, and and we'll begin.
Yeah, lovely to be here. I guess that piece you shared about, the values, the restorative values, is something that I probably care the most about in the work I get to do, trying to honour it, trying to live it, practice it, highlight it. Sometimes people, as we were saying, might misunderstand restorative practice as tips and tricks, or maybe a pathway for behaviour management. And I'm always trying to support us with the switch from behaviour to relationships. It's a philosophy first and foremost, so there's language, there's processes and practices that are explicit, and that's often very helpful, very inviting. but I think the restorative values underpin it. So there's 3 key tenets to the philosophy. So the first is the belief, because it's a philosophy, it's a way of thinking, the belief that we're profoundly relational, and that when we're in good relationships we flourish. The belief that when we're in good relationships we're less likely to cause harm. So the focus is very much on that relational space. The second is the belief that we're interconnected. What affects one affects us all. And when you think about culture, think about community, think about our classrooms, so that idea of restorative practice having its roots in Indigenous communities, and even thinking about breath and law, working in circles, connecting. So it's trying to think, what does that look like, sound like, feel like in our staff room, in our boardroom, in our classroom. And the third is my favourite. The third tenet is my favourite. It's the belief that we're inherently good.
Yeah.
And when things go wrong, we're thinking, what's the context here? What's happened where this has showed up? What might the needs underpinning that behaviour be? Or the feelings driving the behaviour. So that's probably my favourite one. And seek to honour that. And look, I don't always get it right, and maybe none of us do. But it's a practice and a philosophy, a compass, maybe to guide us.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, Michelle, and I'm delighted we're having this conversation, because it's one of those things where we've met a handful of times at events, but it's really just from seeing your work, it screams this real values piece, and this real embodiment, and that you really live it. So it's funny, it's like coming here today, it's almost like I really knew that we were going to have that connection, have the conversations that we've had already, so I'm just delighted that we're having this conversation. But I'd love to hear a little bit about at what point did you become interested in this type of work? Because obviously you're very much a teacher at heart, and you love your role in the classroom as well. And I'm wondering when this or was it always there?
Yeah, look, I do. I loved being a teacher in the classroom. I always thought I was doing what I was meant to do in the world. And I still think of myself as a teacher, I guess now teaching people about restorative practice. But what happened, I guess, when I was teaching in St. Mark's in Tallawest, so I was teaching English and Spanish, and we had a local link agency, CDI in Tallawest, that do gorgeous work in the community. And they brought in, they wanted to serve the needs of the community by bringing in restorative practice as an approach to support with conflict. So there wasn't much happening in an Irish context. I've since found out Margaret McGargle, who actually texted me yesterday about meeting up, but she was doing a little bit of work up in Donegal and Paddy O'Connor in a very small space, but I hadn't heard of it anyway, and it wasn't very, very known. And CDI brought over an agency from England, IIRP, International Institute of Restorative Practice, and they did a training day in our school. And I just felt, I was so connected and inspired, and it gave me a permission and a framework to kind of embed what I really believed in. That punitive response, the rigid response, and I could see our most vulnerable kids just locked in cycles, and I'm like, how's that working? And always felt like that relational lens, the restorative approach that I now kind of have a language to articulate was something that aligned with my own values, but it was the way to work, and if I was being honest, secretly, I always felt I always felt very seeking connections, even in my own spiritual path. I read so many books around this space, and privately, when I think about that restorative approach, it kind of aligns with those values inside, like community and love, connection, the things that I always was seeking to try and learn, try and live. But it gave me permission to bring this into a professional framework, and I think I never, ever, ever planned to leave the classroom. That wasn't something I ever thought of for myself. I never even went for an A post or a B post. I love just teaching. And then when we brought restorative practice into the school, I guess, it was something that I was supporting and coordinating within the context. And then I went to had a lovely opportunity to do a master's in education. And I worked with Dr. Anthony Malone. So I'd become a trainer. And Dr. Anthony Malone supported me hugely on that journey too, to bring a community of teachers that wanted to go on the journey with me. And initially our research was going to be 8 weeks. You know, that's what I thought. And I thought, right, I'll iterate and learn and then do it with another group of potential teachers if they were interested. But it was so enriching, and my understanding, as it still is, just kept deepening. And it was really the paradigm shift from the punitive to that kind of restorative approach that I'm still navigating, but grappling, reflecting in community, reflecting in context. And we enjoyed it so much, our research evolved into 4 cycles, you know. And hand on heart, we met every Monday lunchtime for 3 years.
Wow.
With tea and coffee, we'd have the chats of our lives with the hummus and the bickies, but it had a huge impact on our own stress levels, our own well-being, impact on our teaching and learning. And so I guess that really was the seed that's grown into the work I do now and I care so much about. So I was teaching and loving teaching, and I was doing restorative practice. I had intentions, you know, to write a book and to kind of bring this. I felt like this was something that it was my path, you know. And so I left my lovely school, went on career break, and then, you know, 8 years later, this is what I'm doing full time, you know. So I'm very privileged to have so many people help me and support me and open doors for me and advocate for me, you know. So I definitely didn't get there myself alone, but I feel like I'm doing what I'm meant to do still, you know.
Yeah. And if I could ask, like, what was that like when you came across it? Because, like, I imagine that being very powerful, like this being something that you really believe in as a way of being in yourself, and then all of a sudden you have this language and this framework. Yeah.
It gave me permission to reside there, even when it's tough, or especially when it's tough, and also to support others to kind of, you know, lean into that space, or to look at things differently. Because, you know, I think, how dare who does she think she is in my maths class? I'm thinking, you know, I wonder what's happening, what's going on there. And those little shifts, the kid's in trouble, maybe the kid's in struggle, and maybe I too am in struggle. So it's those little shifts that we were able to navigate or have a language or a literacy for, and something that I've been evolving since. I call them the little restorative switches, you know, attention seeking connect, you know, there's many of them. And I just think that offered me permission. That's the word that springs to mind. No, this is okay, you know, because sometimes I guess people revert back to that punitive, rigid, especially when it's hard, right? Whatever is happening here, let's armor up here and disconnect and show them who's boss, you know. Yeah. And there's always that tension to do that. We live in a culture or a world where maybe that's the way. Otherwise you're a softie, or you're letting them away with things, or, you know. So it was lovely to have a clear pathway and structure. And I don't even know if that was immediately there, because immediately I think it was just, on my best day, this is how I am, and I'd have others like everybody. But it just felt like I could see myself in it. And so that was, it was something that just resonated with me. But since then, I guess that's evolving, that piece around developing a language and a literacy, and you know, learning from so many different people, many people on the ground, teachers, school leaders, SNA students, learn so much from students, as well as having mentors in this area, you know.
What really comes across from listening to you is that for you, restorative practice is a way of being. It's a way of being. It's a way of being, yeah. And rather than doing. Yeah. And I love that. I'm also struck at the moment when I look at the way that we're working this, and we talk about accountability, which is important. Yeah. But we also have this high punitive way of we're very blaming and cross, and that's just the culture that we seem to have in the global space now. And restorative practice is a curiosity about, so where is somebody coming from and what might have influenced that decision. So it's about being present, not only to the person, but to what has come to bring them to this point. Yeah. That's powerful work.
It is. Yeah. And even being present to ourselves, as you were suggesting earlier on, you know, I would have a tendency maybe to be less blaming others and more blaming myself, or giving out to myself. Yeah. And that's a way of trying to control. It gives us a semblance of control, you know. And I guess learning even to that idea of being restorative with me, in my lens, what's going on for me, where that showed up, you know. I always use the analogy of the croc and the giraffe and how we speak, you know. The giraffe is the restorative animal, has the biggest heart of all the land animals. Oh, wow. And we try and speak from our heart space, and the longest neck, so it can perspective take. And the funny thing about the giraffe was, in my family, I was always slagged for being a giraffe. You know, I'm a 6-footer. We're here online,
So
you know.
cool.
Yeah, and anyone with a sibling knows what that's like. And years later, a gorgeous pal of mine, Kira, in school, I was going off to Africa, doing a bit of volunteering, and she gifted me this giraffe, you know. And I was thinking, is this a coincidence, like, you know, that the giraffe's come back into my life? But when I began my restorative work, I used it as my talking piece. And it's called Sophie, after my niece Sophie, one of the loves of my life, right? Yeah. And the kids love it. Are we doing Sophie? And Sophie is a big kind of identity. And it wasn't until a couple of, maybe a year later, we had a group from Maynooth come into our school to see what we were doing around restorative practice. And it was a master's program they were offering around conflict resolution. And one of them says to me, Michelle, I see you're using Rosenberg's giraffe, you know? And I was like, what? Who? And they invited me to look at that NVC, nonviolent communication, and that the giraffe is known as a restorative animal, as I mentioned. Wow. So now I kind of iterate that at the giraffe and the croc. And it's just, again, I'm both. You know, how's it working for me, and who do I want to be? And when I speak like a croc, you know, give it out, and often we get the croc responses, you know. And when I speak like the giraffe, big heart, long neck, maybe less of the you and more of I, maybe the big heart using the, you know, you do that one more time, you'd be big turtle. I feel frustrated. I'd love us to get to work together, you know, would you be willing to? But the thing about the croc and the giraffe is that I'm both. It's not a goodie and a baddie. It's like, how's it working for me? And also, the biggest thing I'm learning is when I'm a croc, I'm usually in struggle. I need probably a cup of tea or a hug or someone to be nice to me, you know? Yeah. So, again, back to the idea of the blame approach versus something where we're trying to support connection and empathy, maybe, because there's a big leap to that in accountability. Blame and accountability are inversely correlated. You know, the more you blame, we just get defensive.
Absolutely.
It's not helpful. If we're looking for adaptation or connection, it kind of counters both. Yeah,
it shuts down anyway, though. If we want to try and find a solution, isn't it always to find the way forward together? So the minute we blame, we cut off the capacity for the other person to hear us, because they then are in self-defense mode to try and survive this feeling of having done something wrong. I didn't know that about the giraffe. That's really interesting. Yeah. So big heart, and I love the long neck perspective taking. That's pretty cool.
Perspective taking. And so obviously we use it as a concept. But for little kids, they really get it. Like so I have a couple of acronyms I use in schools. In a primary school, we use the FRIENDS acronym. But the D is Did You Giraffe? And then the giraffe idea of accountability being embodied. And how might the giraffe say that? Or that it's just great to have these kind of motifs or metaphors. But look around, you'll see everywhere you go.
Yeah, there's a giraffe behind you, which is gorgeous.
There's a cushion. Yeah. It's everywhere. I had to start telling people that I loved in my life, I think I have enough giraffes, you know, because they're everywhere. But I love them, you know, so it's gorgeous. Yeah.
Because it's in the Connect Archie logo, isn't it?
It is, yeah, exactly. So it's in the centre of the O of Connect. So it's the circle and the giraffe at the centre. And again, the intention is that heart, perspective taking, key component of empathy, trying to embed and embody what we do within that frame, you know, of that way of being, not just doing, you know.
I love it. I'd seen it in I think I'd seen one of your videos on YouTube, and the giraffe was there, and I just didn't, I was like, oh, that's interesting, but I hadn't made any connection. Yeah. And now you've explained it, I'm like, I really like that idea.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm a huge fan of NVC, Marshall Rosenberg, and you know, the work that he's done, and the language and literacy, you know, I guess having those conflict literacy skills, the language, but again, language is only, you know, 20-30% of our communication. It's the intention, the tone, the body, like all the other kind of nuances, you know, that are so important.
But sometimes it also helps to just take it outside of ourselves a little bit. So did you giraffe help somebody without saying, what did you do?
Exactly.
You're just saying, did you giraffe? And suddenly you've just put it a little bit outside of yourself, and you can talk to it.
That's it. Exactly.
I love that.
Sadie, one of my gorgeous little nieces, she had a little argument with one of the girls in the road, you know, and she came in and she's like, you know, what shall you? And so she's telling me all the bad things that her pal did, you know, and then I was like, you know, and what happened, and what happened before? And then she was saying something she did, but then she said, I'm a bad friend. And I was like, no, you're not you're learning to be a friend, you know. And last week she was learning to ride her bike, and now she can ride her bike. But it's that idea of not, I am this as a person, it's that behaviour, and separating it from the person, the being, and it's much easier then to kind of look at how we could maybe, you know, support ourselves or others to maybe do better. Yeah.
Because that's where the blame lands you, isn't it, into the shame piece, and that's I am bad,
Exactly.
like not, you
Exactly.
know, this went bad, or, you know, it's the internalizing, isn't it?
Yeah. And look, they say you teach what you most need to know. I mean, we were chatting earlier on, Eve, before we even came on here, and that's something that I'm learning myself all the time. You know, I think I wasn't too bad in conflict situations before that, but being restorative with myself and that shame piece of, you know, trying to strive and, you know, I am bad if I don't do this as a person, as opposed to, look, you know, you missed the mark on that one, you know, but it doesn't define you. That's something that I'm constantly trying to work on, if I was being honest myself, you know, and practice. But it's I guess that's the relationship with the self as well as with others.
There's a huge liberation in it, isn't there? Just as I'm listening to you. So the piece about saying, you know, looking at it and saying it's information. This is, you know, maybe this hasn't gone the best way for me, but I start again tomorrow. Or I start again in the next conversation I have with you in the next 10 minutes. Doesn't mean I'm stuck by what's just happened now. Doesn't keep me stuck there unless I choose it. And we don't have to choose that. I like that idea of being able to just, what happened and what happened before this that brought us to this point of what happened, allows us to understand a bit better where someone is coming from instead of just reacting to the moment.
Exactly, the compassion. And it's generous for others, but it's actually what we were discovering in our research piece was it had the biggest impact on us, because I'm not rooming, going to bed, getting in. We lose sleep. We don't lose sleep about the Wi-Fi or it's the relationships we lose sleep over.
It's true.
And, you know, that idea of internalizing it so deeply and instead just looking at it differently. And that had big impact on our own stress levels, you know. But you were talking about earlier on, Patricia, also the possibilities then when we look at things that way, you know. The hope restorative practice is values based, as I mentioned, but it's always needs led. What were the needs underpinning it? What are the needs of this context, you know? And it just, it's a healthy way, you know, to be and to connect.
And it's humanistic, and I don't use the word humanistic lightly, because I when I say it, I mean it's very much about being present to your own humanity and the humanity of the people that you're with, and that's under siege in the world at the moment, without sounding like a gloomy Nelly, but that's kind of how I do see we are under pressure in the way that we're even thinking ourselves. So allowing ourselves to just come back to heart work and just to be present and see from another person's perspective.
And even in the I'm thinking about staff rooms, you know, that permission as well, because we're very attached to being efficient, you know, and time is so precious, and where is the time, you know? But, you know, that idea of if we're not seeking as a community, I guess one of the biggest barriers and biggest enablers of growing a school committed to restorative practice is when we live it amongst each other. We don't think of it as something that we do with or worse to kids. It's that idea of this way of being amongst one another. And then how do we cultivate intentional spaces to connect, to reflect, to laugh, you know, together in community. And the schools that I get to work with, we're always considering those opportunities. You know, we have a little thing called bite-sized CPD, but the main intention is thinking about an experience that staff will enjoy or will benefit from in community. And again, it might be 10 minutes, so it might be in small groups of 3 or 4, but it's school leaders are often asking me, how do we create buy-in? And there'd be nothing more persuasive, I don't think, than an experience that people feel seen, feel valued, feel heard, or enjoy, you know. So it's, again, trying to facilitate or create those opportunities, as opposed to here's information, you know, you know, and here's stats, but here's an experience, you know, that we try and live together.
I love that, because then it's not just about, you know, restorative practice isn't about just fixing a problem. Which I think some people think about it in that way. And it's not. It's a whole way of relating and talking to each other and liking and caring for each other. Work is hard. But once we have that among ourselves, it filters out to the children, and it filters out to our teaching, I hope. But so I like that you have a much broader philosophy around this.
And I guess it's counter to, you know, the roots of restorative practice within restorative justice, which is where there's a crime, or there's a perpetrator or a victim or a harmed person, whatever phrase we use, that come together with an incident or don't. But we're in communities all day, every day. So I do think another one of my mentors, Dr. Kathy Evans, she was our keynote last year, but she invites us to consider it's not just a framework it's how we view teaching and learning.
Yeah.
So it's again permeating those relational learning communities in our classrooms, relational pedagogy, how we're teaching and learning with one another. And again, like you mentioned, cultivating those spaces. When I think of culture, so schools will often have a mission statement and an ethos, something that they really care about and espouse. And when our values, our mission statement, our ethos and our practices, our whole scope of our practices, our processes match, I guess that's our operational culture then, where we're living it. So it's always trying to think about potentially how are we living them, because sometimes I think in schools, I'm thinking about my old school, for example, was such a community of care and love, long before it heard about restorative practice as a framework, and it also had a rigid punitive system at times, and again that was in the policy as perhaps most schools around the country, and that's the culture we live in. So it is a paradigm shift, and it's quite challenging to navigate away from. But I think the more my school, for example, or schools that I get to work with now adopt that restorative thinking, which I think is most important, the language, the practices, the processes over time, then trying to evolve, where often then our way of being, especially when times are hard, match our community, our values, our ethos. Because it's easy to rock relationships and community when all's well. What are we doing when the times are really hard, you know, and it's difficult? So I think that's the journey of most schools, and it's not a training day and it's not a one and done. It needs purposeful commitment and grappling and reflective practices and opportunities. And that's the work that I love that I get to do,
I listened to some children talking about restorative practice. It was in relation to a piece, because it's really valued in the school that my son goes to, and it was actually the reason why I chose the school was that I knew that this was a strong ethos in the school. But they were chatting away, and then one of them said, like, this restorative practice thing it's great, like, and everything, but you know what, sometimes I just say, just give me the punishment, like, because I actually have to go in there now and sit with that person, and I've got to do this. Right, and so the idea that you're letting them off the hook actually isn't the case at all. It's much harder work to own and sit and listen to your impact on someone else and fix. You're just like, no, that's definitely, when I heard this, I should just, throw me into the detention and be grand.
Yeah, that's right. That's so interesting. This, please suspend me. Don't make me go to that meeting.
Yeah, so it is robust. That's the piece. So just to catch that sense, because it's so easy to just throw away, say things like that. That's just letting people off. But actually taking accountability for our way of being that has hurt someone else, that's hard work.
Really, really hard. Hard for us as adults. Because we have a deep desire to be, loved and lovable, and then it's really hard to tolerate anything else that might counter that, but that, again, one of the misconceptions sometimes is that, restorative practice, like the kids just do what they want and get away with everything, and of course that's the other piece that you're kind of inviting us to consider there, Patricia, around accountability and the idea of, if we can't change what we don't acknowledge. So to tell the truth about something, even when we've caused harm, is really hard. And so to try and create conditions where accountability can live. So accountability and community are inextricably linked. If I feel like I belong, I'm loved, I say to my little Alfie, you're seen with love. When I feel that way, then I contribute. I've ownership over how we are in the space. And that doesn't happen in a day. But I think that is something that you try, the proactive approach, and that we care about each other here. We might, it's not, you do it because Miss Stowe, you'll be in trouble if you don't. Well, is it the right thing to do? No. Like, why are we doing that, or why are we not? So I think it's that piece that's really essential. And then when things go wrong, sometimes we get very attached to taking away privileges, taking away the opportunity to go on that tour or whatever. And instead we're seeking, to try and give back. How could we now contribute to that community? Like, say yesterday on the couch, well, what could we do then with your pal on the road there? What could we do to heal there? What could we do? And she came up with the great idea about giving her bubbles, her little bubble.
Oh, nice.
Thing. But it's something, but in our school context, again, it's funny because schools often want a rigid list. No, give me a list, the 3 strikes and you're out. No tie, you go home. And I understand that, need and lust for that structure because it feels safe. From a restorative perspective, the consistency is in the process. And of course, whatever we're seeking to repair, needs to be connected to the harm that happened, you know, and it's hard to have a list of that in advance, you know. So it's the people, if you're in the problem, you're in the solution. If you've been part of the harm, it's having a voice to know what you might need to move forward, or, you know, but it's so healing, I think, for people who've been harmed, but also for those who may have caused harm. And sometimes everybody is everything. We've all, you know, hurt people, as we mentioned. And sometimes, you know, when we look at the harm instead of the blame, it can be infinite. Blame is proportionate. You started it. No, you said it first. But harm can be everybody's, you know.
Yeah.
The mum that gets the call, the principal that now can't go on this tour because they have to, you know, the other kids in the class. It can be infinite, and it's far more likely to create connection and healing.
I think what's important, like in terms of that way of being as well, is that, like, you know, there's so much happening in schools that sometimes it can be like writing another thing, and then that can feed, I suppose, the desire for the 10-point list, because you know exactly what it is. But like this is it's everything that's happening in a school anyway, but it's just a way of being in that situation. So it's not like an extra thing to what we're doing, but it's a switch in the way that we're thinking about it and the way in which we're engaging with one another.
Exactly.
But it's so layered, isn't it? Because there's, like, you know, we've said that in the conversation, the obvious bit that people think about is, you know, that interaction with a student or between students if something has gone wrong and there has been hurt. But like, if you're peeling that back to the way in which I'm modelling as a teacher in the classroom, the way in which I'm presenting myself and who I'm bringing to those situations, or further down then, and we've talked about this as well, how am I being restorative to myself, and that will inform how I'm coming to that situation. And you know, so there's lots of layers to it.
Loads.
So it's I mean, it couldn't possibly be in a 10-point checklist, but that also doesn't mean that it's a whole massive thing that's added on.
I love that, Niamh. You know, I do a day, I only started this year actually, I was saying to you guys, on the art of relational school culture leadership, and it's for deputies and principals, and you know, there's been a strong kind of appetite for it. But one of the things they love and really welcome is we do this, it's like a mini tri-circle, so it's about 10 minutes, and it's a process that's super efficient and succinct, really honours the equity of voice, and we try and maximise solutions. So everyone might share an issue or problem, and there's 3-step worded structure, and then people try and in community offer suggestions, but they love it. And they say, I can't wait to do that with my year heads, can't wait to do my leadership team. And it's very efficient. And I think sometimes for some of our maybe staff who won't like the idea of the giraffe, who will raise their eyes when I talk about smiling when you walk into the classroom, right, will go, oh my God, great. And also you're building a culture in our staff room where everyone's voices are honoured or grown or nurtured or heard. Because sometimes in there might be a culture where 2 or 3 people dominate staff meetings and gatherings, and they can be the loudest voice and it mutes everybody else. So when I think about what you're suggesting there, is remind us in existing structures, how can we bring processes and practices in that support us, you know, with the collective wisdom, tapping into it, with being solution focused, with connecting, you know, and honouring that equity of voice for people. When all's well, goodwill and good times, and then you have a framework then for potentially navigating in when things are difficult, you know. Yeah,
there's a piece of, like, and we were talking about this, you are who you teach, you know, we were talking about that, and there's a piece of what does this restorative practice look like in terms of who I am, and you know, what can I learn from this, and how can I take this and use it, you know, in the way that I'm presenting myself, because it's going to look very different for everyone. Like, as you say, some people are very comfortable coming into the classroom and, you know, doing that smile when you come in the door and being that type of a presence, and other people aren't. But there's different ways in which we can engage with it. There's infinite ways in which we can engage with it.
Exactly. And I think the more we see those possibilities as a school, again, staff meetings, pedagogy, when we're linking it into a framework for how we view teaching and learning and how we operationalize the culture in our school, as opposed to 6 questions you ask kids when they're in trouble, then I think we see the huge possibilities. And again, linking it in with you know, I'm thinking about the layoffs, I'm thinking about, you know, our school improvement plans. So they're the kind of things that we try and support school leaders to to use when thinking
Yeah.
about implementing that restorative approach and lens?
I experienced that circle, the sort of a problem solving kind of where I sat with colleagues and raised a really kind of sticky wicket, as I call them, one of these kind of wicket problems you can't solve. And you know, I just from my own perspective, I had to do a bit of work to stop myself wanting to say but.
Exactly.
Really had to do that, like, but I've tried this out. And I once I leaned into that piece of the work and allowed people to speak, I was able to sift through every suggestion and see real potential. It was just totally life-changing in terms of leadership for me. And it also does something really interesting because it gives voice to other people who see themselves stepping up to help you by problem solving with you, as opposed to giving you feedback, which is a different dynamic. It was fabulous.
That's it. It's the culture. And you know what, Patricia, you reminded me as well about when we were doing our research, you know, so that's the foundation. Now when I work in schools, we call it the B or P hive. It's where we be or P. So we're not learning, ticking off boxes, we're being it as a group of community of, let's say, educators. So, but the roots of it was my research with Dr. Anthony Malone around professional learning community, essentially. So we were looking at a student X or a class X that we found it really difficult to connect with, okay? And everyone had a different reason as to why that might be, but that's what we were, because we were trying to intentionally implement different things on purpose and then reflect on how it went. And there were 3 lenses. The first was, did it work, did not work? The first was, what was the impact on the other? So the student or the class or whatever. And the second was, what was the impact on me? And that was hugely emerging. You know, I remember when the teacher saying, listen, student X is still roaming the corridor some days, but I'm not getting sucked into that crazy train as quickly. I'm not going home with the migraine, and I'm meeting him differently. And so it was looking at the other student X, ourselves, and other people in the context and environment. So one of the things we noticed was when we were restorative, when meeting challenges, the others in the periphery, in this context, students were more likely to work with us, even if the other student at that time did or did not. Like, there's no magic wands or unicorns.
I wish there
We're
was.
not saying, you know, you work and then we all skip. That's not the case. But those lenses were helpful. But what we noticed was, when we're in the staff room, the culture there at times, you know, if we're giving out, and we're allowed to give out. Should Lainey, who isn't allowed to go, wait and I tell you what happened. And there's a space for that. And it could be, don't you mind them, you know. But if we're doing that every day, all day, there's a problem, you know, for ourselves. And in the staff meeting around the tea, the culture is typically, you know, don't mind them or giving out or whatever. When we were in our B or P hive, what I call now the B or P hive, the context was to be an empathic witness to each other, you know, to say, okay, and also invite a nudge in another direction. Might you try? Or what do you think about? And sometimes say, no, I would not try. And that's okay, you know. I have a real powerful one, a story. Will I share? Or
Please do. I'm loving this.
There was teacher 5, and there was a young man, and she said, I tried restoratively. He didn't have a calculator. I tried. And, you know, I asked him the restorative question. I asked him, why don't you have your calculator? We were like, it's what happened. But anyway, and he told me to F off, right? And that's it. And I've gone to the year head, and at that time, the process was of a student or teacher, he's getting suspended, you know, and you could see she's real hurt, you know, because she was being vulnerable. She tried to take the little risk, and he told her to F off. And so we were kind of just, you know, sharing the space, listening, and another kind of teacher said, might you try having the conversation with him, not in front of everybody, because that was in the class. Might you try? And she said, I might. And we were like, she's not going to do that. She like, there's no way. But the next week she came back and she said, so we would reflect then. And sometimes we engaged, sometimes we didn't, but we just take a little check-in. And she said that she very bravely, I thought, went back to the young man again to have a word. And she said it was very clear to me that there was something wrong. And she said it was like he had had a blackout. That's what she had interpreted from speaking with him. And she went to the tutor, and the young man had a social worker, and the young man spent a couple of days in hospital. His mental health was very poor. And I always really remember it well, because I mean, coming back and saying, like, if I wasn't doing this, you know, my normal would be like, last time you tell me to F off, that's it, you're gone. And just because I was doing this, it took a while, and maybe with the support of the group, to just go back. And it's not to say that every context is like that, but the power of story. We were sharing our stories, and that has resonated with me 8 or 10 years on, you know, where I think about these little stories, our stories. And that's what the restorative questions are about, story sharing, not investigating. But it was those little anecdotes that allowed us to just think about committing to this approach. You know, I think it's really hard if you deal in contexts where there's a lot of unmet needs or complicated needs. It's hard, and it's hard if you're punitive, and it's hard if you're restorative. But we have to pick our heart, and I think
I agree.
that connection to the community allowed us kind of to for that journey, which is a long-term journey. You know.
Yeah. I love that. I'm tingling as I'm listening to you, because I think there's a piece for me I love that piece about we have to pick our heart. Either journey is going to be difficult, and especially in these types of contexts where something has got broken, and that's a moment of being broken. But the question I'd ask myself is, what do I want to see looking back at me after I've done this piece of work? You know, like, will I be true to myself? And will I help that? Like, how will I best help this person? And sometimes it can be that just that nugget of saying, would you try talking on the one-to-one, which is risk and courage work for that person to do that. I really respect that teacher did that. Yeah. And it allowed her to see, and it allowed, because there is that piece sometimes about saying I felt exposed. For sure. And I reacted. And that's okay. You know, it's not okay to say F off, but you know, in school, but it's okay to say I reacted, and I regret that.
Absolutely.
So, and I'm just thinking about the humans of the future that we're helping to grow here, and what that person is learning about it's okay to go back, to circle back and say what's going on, and how can I do this differently? How can we retake that and do this differently and make this better for a solution where I'm going on and I apologise, but where that teacher can go back into a relationship with that student in that classroom again without this hanging over you. I just love that, I think.
Because, you know, sometimes we remove students or other from contexts, but it's not the same as establishing a sense of safety. Yeah. So when that comes back, but you remind me of, I'm thinking of, can you girls think of times where it's really hard to say, look, I didn't handle that the way I could have, you know, but the kindness you're often met with, you know, the forgiveness. I'm thinking about kids, miss, you're grand. I mean, you know, don't worry about it, you're having an off day or whatever, you know, but to try and model that, I guess, if we're not modeling that, again, what are we modeling? Perfectionism or, you know, I have to be right because I'm all knowing. And of course we don't want to be modeling that, but it's a risk. It's really hard to do.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this before, but I was in a situation where I was so caught up, it was so high stakes about what I wanted to do, and I went, and it's not normally my way of going, but I went really expediently, and I kind of, somebody who was bringing something really big, I didn't allow the space for that to come through, and I felt like I came back to my office and I closed the door, and I just felt, this is just not okay. It's just, you know, I was so and I knew it. I said I was so caught up in trying to achieve, and there was so many other factors that were causing problems that I just wanted to get it done. And I turned to come out of my office to go and find the colleague to say, that was not a good moment, and I am so sorry. And when I opened the door, he was standing there, and he said, I was just wondering, would you like a cup of tea? I was like, I would love a cup of tea, because I wanted to take the time to say, I'm sorry, you know. And he said, you have a lot going on, and I just wanted to connect with you. And that was so restorative of him, even though I was the one who had been so businesslike and managerial that I'd lost sight of him. I didn't hug him, but I really wanted to, as a colleague, and say, thank you for being so generous.
But that's a reservoir of all you've built, your relationship with him, I'd imagine. You know, it was generous of him to come back on Restorative, but I'd imagine that's it. Partly because of a relationship you guys shared where he cares about you. He knows you care about him. And what does it say if you say, I'm sorry I rushed that? Like, it says you're real important to me, or that's important and I made a mistake. Yeah. Do you know? Yeah. Conflict isn't bad. It's an opportunity for connection. That's one of the key principles of RP and education. It's an opportunity, you know. But that's a gorgeous story.
Just really admire him even more for that. I'm like, I like you even 10 times more now.
And I bet you he feels the same about you.
I hope.
Like, you know, to say as the head
I'll ask
you know what, I rushed that, or I made a mistake. I just think our world needs it, you know, not to be armoured up perfect. Oh, I might get in trouble if I say X, Y, or Z, you know.
But the generosity of spirit of someone is so. you're drawn towards it, aren't you? You're drawn towards a person that has that sort of graciousness, and this is about graciousness too, just to use that sort of way of being with each other. I just love that.
And I think it builds trust. Like, I trust, then if someone makes a mistake and then says that they're sorry or owns it, then I think, I trust now. It doesn't counter trust. I have to be perfect, otherwise they won't believe in me. I'm like, okay, because I know you're authentic, you know, and it's
I was just going to say, I think that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? Like, it's not about, restorative practice isn't about finding the perfect space. You know, it doesn't exist. Like, if you're talking about it being all based on relationships, which it is, I mean, it's one of the, you know, the 4 areas that we were talking about at the start, relationships. There's hurt in relationships, and like, that's the reality of it. You know, there's so many, like, there's fun in relationships, there's love in relationships, there's happiness, but there's hurt in relationships, and that's unavoidable. So it's about the way in which we're responding with that to ourselves and to others that this is about. We're never going to reach a situation where we're removing that. So,
but you know, something I think about a lot is that idea you're sharing, that relationships involve risk. So all relationships involve risk, and you can't have them without the bit of risk, you know. Then you get the love, the connection, the hard time, and in some spaces I tolerate risk really well, you know, and I don't have maybe trauma in them, you know, or past hurt, so I can take great risks. In the classroom, for example, in mediation, I'll go, like, that'll be okay, and I just know it doesn't ruminate in me. I'll take a risk, and often, you know, it's not about me, it's the space that we all hold, and I think that'll be okay. And then there's other parts of my life where I notice I don't tolerate those risks, probably from past hurts, childhood wounds, you know, different relational spaces where I'll stay safe and removed, and you'd need a lot of work now to get me open, you know, whereas I could be very open. And so I'm thinking of our capacity sometimes, you know, to take those risks is so different in different spaces. I notice for me in my life anyway, you know.
I think that's profound, actually, because I think we assume sometimes that we're the same in risk taking in relationships with it, but we're not. It's context and trust specific to. And I really know, I think about it a lot for myself, and having that information. You know, we talked about the roots there. Dr. Dorothy Vandering reminded me about the idea that we're born in relationship. We're broken sometimes in relationship, and we're healed through relationship. So those little therapeutic moments, the little healing. And again, I noticed, let's say for me in my life, there's some parts of my life where maybe there's that bit of brokenness that requires healing, but it's healed through relationship. I've all the information, I've read 1 million books, you know, I've done the processes, but it's relationships that heal us, you know. And I think that's relevant. I'm thinking about my own personal life, but even your example there with a colleague, you know, where the two of you had, and that could have gone a different trajectory. You know, where you're going home thinking, if you weren't who you were, or you didn't have the relationship, or he wasn't who he was, you know, the slight, and then it builds up, and you know, it's I don't know, it's but you said to us just before we went on air, we talked about hurt people, and then you said, and healing people heal people, which really I thought was an amazing thing to say in response to that comment, and it's really going to stay with me. I can see myself thinking about that for a while, because it's true, isn't it? That you in healing yourself, or engaging in relationships that are, or engaging in a way in your relationships that are healing, you invite healing. And that restorative practice seems to be very much about that. When I look at it more deeply, I love that.
And I guess I can definitely see it in my own personal life too, even within, you know, my family. And we were chatting about things earlier on where you can see the healing just ripple out a little bit, you know. And then also how you know, our thinking becomes corrupted when we're hurt sometimes, or we're wounded, and so it's trying to counter that corrupted thinking a little bit at times, you know, and offer an invitation to look at it differently. But I can see that very profoundly and vividly in my own personal life. And listen, I'm still on the journey myself. I was working with Grattan Donnelly. I mentioned he's going to be one of our keynotes along with you, Patricia, for our walk. We have to talk about our Connector walk. But he reminds me, like, no one needs fixing. Everybody needs healing. And I think it's not fixing, making myself, it's just those little moments of healing. And it might be for everybody, but I'm talking about my personal life there now. Maybe I'm oversharing. I have a tendency to overshare. But in professionally, I think it's the same, you know? It permeates, you know, when even where there's maybe a toxic space in a staff room where only 2 or 3 people speak and no one else speaks till we get to the car park, or there's a wounds or past hurts, and we're here every day for years, and it can really impact our mental health, our well-being. We were talking earlier on about the connection between mental health and relational health. And when we're relationally healthy and we feel connected with ourselves and others, it has a big impact on our own well-being, our mental health, you know. And you look at very young people now, social media, phones, school refusal, all the challenges and issues we're navigating in schools. So how do we try and nurture relational health, you know? And I guess that's what I care deeply about, trying to learn about and live.
We met with a retired school principal, Olive Lafoy, recently.
She's amazing.
Oh my God.
I share the Will network. She's hilarious as well, isn't she? She's fab.
Had a fabulous meeting with her. She's helping us with our micro-credential, and I had wanted to meet her for a long time, and I just came away going, that was so fantastic. But in one of the pieces of conversation with my colleague Nikki, she said something about how we can polish a hurt.
Yeah.
We can hang on to it and do a bit of polishing and just really carry it with us, and that we have to choose to not do that, you know, and to find healing ways to move forward from it. So it's resonating really well with what you're saying as well, and I hadn't thought about that. But then when I began to talk about it with friends, I was like, we actually, you know, we can do that.
Do you know what? A reframe of that's really resonated with me. I heard you just reminded me, and I thought about it for myself in different spaces too. But so I might tell you about a hurt, but I won't show you it. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I might report it, but I won't show you the wound, but I'll tell you about it. And I think we share with people who've earned the right to hear it. We share with people that we feel safe with, that we feel that connection, you know, that will be honoured. You know, I don't think we should share a wound with everybody.
I agree.
But we can, you know, I can tell you about it, so I can speak about that sometimes. And then, but if I was showing you, sometimes it's the hard share. Am I explaining that?
No, I get that.
Do you get the difference?
Yeah, I get when you.
So I can see the difference for me, where I might tell you, but I won't show you.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you have control of the narrative, don't you?
Yeah.
If you're telling someone something rather than showing, I think that's the...
And I think that's when we invite people into restorative spaces. I'm talking about the higher end of the continuum, you know, where there's maybe a deep hurt or a long history of a wound. We're inviting people to tell their story, but also, you know, it's really hard to show those wounds, you know, it doesn't feel safe, you know. Yeah. So if the first time we talk about restorative practice is when we're talking about really risky spaces, if we haven't built the all day, everyday stuff, the foundational piece, the connection and belonging, thinking about restorative practice in all these facets, we definitely haven't built the reservoir to navigate the most highest risk spaces, you know.
As you're talking, I've spent most of my career as a researcher now. When I took my first career break, it was around researching workplace bullying among teachers and staff rooms, and it was painful work. And I was talking recently about the decades since then, and you know, we've made progress in relation to how we know about it, but not in engaging with it really. You know, we've all the policies in the world, but it has had no impact on the success in addressing it. But as I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, the hard spade work would be to be restorative in that space, which would be really painful for people to do. But that's really the only solution to moving forward, because we have to be able to move forward, and some people stay stuck. You know, I worked with someone who went through so much in that teaching space, you know, in a school, and I was like, there's no solution for her. And you were saying, but maybe restorative practice is a way forward. And you know, now it requires highly skilled engagement and trust building over, I would say, a longer period of time. But it's got potential. Yeah.
And in my old life, you know, when I left school, first part of the work I used to do was I might work, if there was an issue maybe that needed mediation and a referral from the court system or from schools in a high, maybe challenging or difficult deep harm, and they want an external facilitator. But like, it takes a lot of support, a huge amount of preparation, voluntary participation, and sometimes we want the quick fix, you know, we don't have time for that. And so I said, well, no, I'm not the right person to facilitate, because I'm not going to just bring people into a room and reharm them, or you know, but school life's not built for it, or sometimes the workplace, because we've bells and you know, it's trying to find a way to think, right, if we don't, again, another little phrase, I'm mentioning Dorothy all over today, but she invites me to use a frame around what's the benefit and what's the burden. What's the benefit if I do? What's the burden if I do? For example, facilitate the circle or the meeting. What's the benefit if I don't? What's the burden if I don't? And who's impacted by that? And I just really like it. It's a great friend to me because it's never easy, a quick X or Y. Yeah. It just helps me reflect and perhaps inviting other people to reflect on the benefit and the burden of doing it or not doing. A dear friend of mine was a colleague, and she had an issue with a deputy principal. And the story we tell ourselves, and we'd go for walks and she's telling me the same story, and I'm like, knock on the door, go speak to them. No, and the fear to knock on the door. Yeah. Because again, maybe even just having a literacy. What will I say? How will I say it? What do you think? And again, that's what I think. There's a lovely analogy again: strong back, soft belly. And the soft belly is where connection lives. That's our, when we show our soft belly, we connect. Otherwise, we get prickly like the hedgehog, But we only show our soft belly if we have a strong back. And so what builds our strength in our back, I think, is having that language, the literacy practice framework. So we worked on, again, NVC, nonviolent communication, has a 4-step process. And, so when I see, I feel, because I need, would you be willing to? So a little framework, which I guess having the courage to go show her soft belly and knock on the door, very hard thing to do. Yeah. But when she did, the situation didn't even change. But she was expressing a story she was telling herself around that she wasn't valued enough because she didn't get these hours and someone else did. And she gave him the opportunity to say, oh my goodness, no, I'm so sorry that's perhaps I miscommunicated, or maybe there was a cross wires. Here's the reason why. But I can absolutely promise you, if that comes up again, I will try my best. I can't guarantee it, but I'll try my best to honour, your need there. But the situation shifted completely for her because she's not ruminating again. He doesn't like me. He favour them. How did he? And that's what happens to us. I do it myself. I have to try and counter. Shelley, is that the most generous assumption you can make? Like, is that definitely true? No, it mightn't be true. Yeah. But the courage to knock on the door, and it's so much fairer to the school leader too, who's just oblivious behind that. If we don't knock on the door and say, could we have a chat? But it's hard to do. But it's very healthy,
Yeah, we don't know what we don't know, really.
We don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. And I love this concept of relational health. I think we're talking so much about well-being in such a generic way at the moment. Yeah. And a lot of this is bound up in relational health, actually, I think. Yeah. We just haven't looked at it.
And the connection then to our well-being, our mental health. Yeah. That deep to need. That's why I also think this as well when I look at our students in struggle or our colleagues in struggle. And I'm thinking, we have that deep desire to be in good relationship. Like we're innately wired for that, and then should we do our best maybe? On our best day, who wouldn't want to be in good relationship if they knew how, if they had a language, if they had something available to them? But whatever happens, we disconnect, we armor up, we shut down, we don't know how. And if we did, we might,
Yeah. But I think you need space, don't you, to think about these things. You need to make this space to have this conversation, to move into that more healthy way of. Because it's even when you're engaging in this way of being for others, you're doing it for yourself. And I think that's the big theme that's coming out of our conversation today for me.
And Patricia, that's why, so I work with a lot of schools on a 3-year journey and beyond. I have an evergreen program. So I ran it for the first time last year, and all of our schools bar one, but then they came back actually this year because it's the maintenance piece around reflective practice, a little and often. And I think the damage happens sometimes where we think of training days in August, and we've done that training. We're a restorative school. We're some of all our parts, and maybe we're committed to this approach, but it needs consistent nurturing and minding, no more than, sure, I know about Pilates, but I haven't gone in about 4 months, but I know how to do Pilates, but I'm not practicing it, and I think it's the practice piece and the reflective piece, which is really essential, know.
You talked a little bit earlier about how we measure success. Will we have a brief chat about that, I think?
Yeah. So one thing that we can often attach to is, does it work? So people might say, but does RP really work? Did it work with so-and-so? And then I'm always inviting us to consider, well, it depends how we measure success, you know? If you mean conformity, because usually they want to know is, did the kid do what you said or whatever? Then I think, you know, nothing fixes all our problems. No, it won't guarantee conformity. I think it maximizes the potential for people to work with us. But, you know, your punitive approach that we can be attached to doesn't either, because the same kids are constantly in the cycle. And I work in a prison setting sometimes. I see the school to prison pipeline. But success is, like, did I like who I was in that situation? I'm 50% of every communication. How was I managing my 50%? You know, was I modeling what I hoped the other might mirror back? Did I plant seeds for a relationship to grow? It mightn't today, maybe in the future. You know, was I practicing my values, living my values? These are the things I invite us to consider to respond to how we measure success, as opposed to compliance or conformity, because it's not behaviour management. And sometimes schools co-opt the restorative practices and processes to reinforce those hierarchical structures that we're seeking to move away from, you know? So it's not about do what I say, but I'll ask you nicely, you know, which sometimes people misinterpret it as, you know? So I think that's the part that's important, and that's the grappling and the reflecting and, you know, but I think what you said earlier on, Niamh, about knitting what we're doing into existing structures and frameworks, or like the efficient meeting, the way to connect in a staff meeting, relational pedagogy, how are we maximising student participation here using standing concentric circles or whatever. We're thinking about it in the all day, every day, and building capacity then as well in times of challenge.
Yeah. I have a curveball for you. Start with this now, and we'll,
Here we go.
I'm off. But okay, so we know that some of the hurts that staff experience are around promotions.
Oh my God.
You know, and it's devastating. It is, and especially when you look at putting yourself forward for an AP post, it's so public, and then, you know, if you're not successful, it's just really difficult. I'm just seeing the potential for restorative practice in this space.
Yeah.
Do you see it, or?
Yeah, you know, I did a share at the NAPD last year, and it was something that Paul Crone had invited me to consider in the context of, you know, trying to facilitate human-centred conversations.
Lovely.
And the challenging times we're talking about is like that, you know, post responsibilities or, you know, hiring, and it is exposing and painful, you know, and so I don't think there's any one remedy or, again, a formula, but I do think that human-centred approach, acknowledging the harm that happens there and the needs we might have around how do we move forward, or you know, they're the kind of things that we need to do in community. But it's I can that pain, that the wound that those things can incur, and I've seen people then leave schools, give up sports, feel so retreated and unacknowledged. So we have to have a way to talk about that. Yeah, and I think that we do really need a way to talk about that, and a way to understand it, because it takes a lot when because somebody had said to me, so when you decide to apply, you attach yourself to it, and once you attach yourself to it, you're going to get hurt if it doesn't go your way. But if there's 14 people in one post, it's, you know, there are going to be 13 people that it's not going to go their way. So it is just so hard. And it's hard for leaders to go into that space, and it's hard for staff who feel so hurt that they've given so much and they're not the one that has been successful. So I was at a gorgeous principal that I worked with for about 8 years. Can I say his name? Yeah, go for it. Dave Anderson. Okay. And so he was the principal in Adamstown, but because I'd worked there for so long, at the end we did a kind of a celebration circle for Dave, right? And they all love staff are crying, and I'm like this, you know, I love a cry girls as well. And just the impact he had on them, and some of the staff was saying, you're like that dad to me or whatever, and I was like, whew. But he said, one of the things that he said was, I'd just like to also say that, you know, I applied for a role of deputy and principal, I can't remember which one. He said 10 times, and 9 times I was rejected, you know. Yeah. And so just to say that it doesn't mean never, it's just that example of seeing this school leader who was really loved and respected and by his team, the community that work with him, and for him to model that and say, listen, I was rejected loads of times, and I'm good at it, haven't I? But those kind of things I think are healthy. Then you think, okay, well, even if it happened today, it will happen to me, because like you said, if 11 are going, only one will be appointed.
And that's also, it's a fabulous mentoring to do. I remember going for a position once and I didn't get it. Well, many of them I didn't get, but this one hurt, I was like, oh God, it's very public, oh my God. And I was going to a professor who was in the discipline, who I admire greatly, was retiring and in the UK, and I was invited to the retirement celebration. I thought, I'm going to show how much I have valued his contribution. I'm going to go. So I flew over and did that. And I don't know how it came up. I didn't mention what had just happened. So I was, polishing my heart, and I didn't mention it. And he said, it took me 4 goes to get, and it was a couple of levels below what it took me 4 goes to get there. And I went, oh my God, if it took 4 goes for this like genius to get there, I'm doing okay. I've just had one on this one. I have 3 more to go. But it just was such a mentoring gift, because a lot of the time we feel we must just show that we were so successful and that's it. Yeah. And I just thought, coming home, I was like, what a really kind gift to give. Because he was basically saying, and he had no idea, but saying, keep going if at first you don't succeed. So I love that. I think about your Dave, I think the same thing, that's leadership too, isn't it?
For sure. Like we mentioned Dr. Anthony Malone earlier on, but they have a huge influence on my life, even on the trajectory of what I'm doing now, I imagine. Just giving me, helping me see myself in a new way. What the possibilities are. I guess we were doing that research together. He was my supervisor. So we're actually leaning into a new piece now together. Nice. With the school. So at that time it was a community of teachers in one school that I was part of, and now we're going to work with 5 or 6 of our schools who are on that school culture partnership for many years, and then just exploring maybe from that lens,
I love it, what
the impact might be. But he's had a huge influence on me, but like that I probably still do. I have on a pedestal, and he's always trying to knock himself off, like, the only way to go on a pedestal is down, but help me see myself in the spaces where he lives, naturally. And he says, I'm not always, I'm like, oh, okay, really? Maybe you too sometimes.
I have to agree with you. I know him not well, but anytime I've been in his company, I've been blown away, I have to say. And he chaired a session at a recent conference, the SAI was on, and he chaired the session. And I sat there and went, it's just so accomplished and gracious and incredible and humanistic. I was like, this guy really, really embodies a way of being that's important for education. So I'm with you.
When you came and sat here, because one of the things I struggle with is giving myself a hard time. And then, as I mentioned, giving myself a hard time, I would give myself a hard time, right? And then when you said, and we were having a chat and we were telling me something, you said, that sometimes you can give yourself a hard time. I was like, oh my God, even Professor Patricia McNamara, but it's cool because then I see myself in you and you and me, and it's that they're the little moments, when they talk about. There's a lovely analogy. Have you seen the movie The Gremlins?
No.
Do you remember the movie The Gremlins? The 80s girls.
I remember the movie, but I didn't see it.
But how they got rid of the gremlins, so, they bring them into the light. So the gremlins can't survive the light, And it's a lovely analogy around, I think Brené Brown talks about the shame gremlins that give out, And then when you bring it into the light and someone's like, me too, or I understand, it just, then it just loses all its power, So I love that the next time when I give it, I'm like, sure, even Patricia might do this.
No, I do, I totally do.
And then I can be able to, thank you, not now. Is something I'm working on, Yeah,
I heard you say that to me, and I actually, I sort of stored it into, I will be using that this week.
Thank you, not now.
Thank you, not now, I'll be using it this week. But somebody else said, it's really interesting you're saying that, because somebody said something recently about an issue, a cultural issue that was happening in a staff, and we were working through it, and the response was, light is the best disinfectant, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Beautiful.
And I thought it was really powerful about saying just being open will actually stop you carrying this by yourself. I loved it. In the Gremlin.
Gorgeous.
It's the same idea.
It's the same idea. It's the same idea.
Open it up. It's never as bad when you say it out as it is in your head, is it?
Exactly. It's not. It's never as bad, no.
Yeah.
I remember a kid saying to me once, right, we were doing shame, and he says to me, here, you know, that's the same as like, imagine if I had a big spot, you know, and I was like that. Go on. You tell me more. And they're like, you know, and it's I feel I look awful disgusting, and I don't want to go to, like, I won't go to school, my mum and I are fighting and all. I was like, yeah. And then I didn't go to a party that night or whatever, and I was like, yes. And she's, or I say it then, I say to my mum or my friend, you know, this is how I'm feeling, and they say, oh God, you know, no, or, you know, sure, you're gorgeous, or I felt like that too, I understand how you feel. I was like, that's exactly, it's all those moments where sometimes we just don't tell anybody, and it's big in our heads, and then we're stuck, and then we disconnect from our relationships, you know.
And then it gets worse.
And it just gets worse and worse and worse.
It runs around.
I'll tell you, do I have time to tell you this?
Absolutely.
One of the big things in our research, we did this piece, I think it had the most profound impact on all of us as a community seeking to commit to a restorative approach, and it was the understanding of shame we were talking about, you know, the compass of shame, the impact of shame. And so teachers would start to say things like, total compass of shame there, you know, as opposed to how dare. But we were invited, Parker Palmer, it was from Parker Palmer, that I was inspired, and one of the things I was inviting the group to reflect upon is if our student X could express themselves in a healthy way, what would they say? So currently they might be telling you to F off, or sort of, you know, I'm not doing that this day. And teachers said things like, I can't really read very well, and I'm very embarrassed by that, so I'll do anything I can not to be exposed. Or they said things like, I scream and shout because I don't have another way to communicate, so I need to get you before you get me. They said things like, I'm not in school that often, and there's lots of things at home that distract from school, and when I'm here I just feel lost, I'm never going to get there, you know. And we were like, oh God, it's
massive.
Like,
it's really upsetting.
So how's what we're currently doing working for us? Like, you're never going to punch that out of somebody, there's not enough detentions. So a shift in just, it's those little things that were huge things. Then we were just meeting it a bit differently. So we tried to, like, you know, catch them being good, saying their name with kindness. I remember hearing this documentary about love, and this kid says, when someone loves you, the way they say your name is different. Wow. You know, your name is safe in their mouth. They say, and I'm thinking about me with Sadie. I'm like, Sadie, hi Sadie. She's like, hi Shelley. But in school, you know, Jack, Sarah, or even colleagues, you know, but just simple, trying to, like, catch ourselves, say the name with a bit of affection or kindness just tomorrow, and notice, you know. And it was those small little things that we were looking at, and then noticing the impact that might have, you know. It was really lovely. There's sometimes the kids were suspicious of us. The teacher said, like, hi Jack, you know, hi, look at that.
What's after happening?
Like, but just seeing that melt, I love, because it melts who we're not. Because I think deep down we are seeking connection, love, community, but it melts who we're not. I
love that.
And it kind of connects to who we might really are, you know.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm really thinking about, and like Patricia, you kind of touched on this earlier in saying that, like, the theme of a lot of what we're talking about being, like, yourself in relation to what's happening. So we're talking about even the restorative practice and how you are with yourself and your relationships. But I keep thinking about this piece of, like, there's two sides to it of finding your autonomy in the places you can make an influence, because when we're talking about these difficult things, like whether it's apologizing or, you know, coming to someone and having the difficult conversation, it's the things like the shame or the embarrassment or the, you know, how you want to be perceived, or those types of things about you and yourself internally that will stop you from doing that. So there's a piece around, like, who can I be in this situation? But then there's also a piece around, you know, the person that tells you to F off, and you saying, well, look, that isn't about me, you know, that's something, there's something that's happening with them there. So there's, like, two things coming together there in terms of seeing what is the, you know, you were talking about the 50% that you would bring in the conversation, like, what is the piece of me that I can bring, and how can I just be there for the other person to be who they are.
Absolutely, for sure. I love that.
Seeing behind the language, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
We had an experience a good few years ago where a student wasn't happy with some aspect of their course. I wasn't the course director, but I knew the course director was a good colleague and was working hard. But something got broken in the communication, and the student And I mean, their first communication was, you can stuff your effing diploma up your effing hole. That was the first. And I was like, okay, you know. And the
What do you really think?
yeah, tell me what you really think. And the course director was really upset, and it took him a few days to say it to me, you know. And then we sat down and I said, okay, let's have a cup of tea and figure this out, right? And then I said, so where's he coming from, you know? And he talked a little bit about the background, and then I said, okay, and why do you think he's feeling this angry? Because he's feeling quite angry. And he was able to explain that, and he said, but he doesn't, you know, he's not used to the way that we would expect this to go. And I went, well, wow. And he went, oh my God, I've spent 2 days running this around my head. And I got so caught up in how something was being said, I didn't listen to what was being said. I was like, bingo. Yeah. But if that was, you know, and that sounds like now I really knew what I was doing, I didn't. Because if that was me in the moment, I would have felt, you know, well, excuse me, how dare you, how very dare you to speak to me like that, you know. But because I wasn't part of it, I could see both sides of it. And the course director is an amazing person, and was able to see, you know, he just laughed and he said, right, I just need to go back and chat to this guy. Totally. And a week later he said, that's so sorted, and I got it. I was so happy, you know, to see. And he said, I learned so much from that. And I said, what really did you learn? He said, not to run around my head with it.
Yes. Yeah.
Just either to talk to the person or talk to someone who's able to see it differently to me. Yeah. I was like, I'm taking that lesson for myself too.
Absolutely.
It was really
It's
interesting.
so much harder when it's you yourself, isn't it? I mean, you were even talking about this earlier in the self-talk, and like, would you talk to someone else like that? You wouldn't.
No.
You know, or if someone else was going through that situation, would you be saying, oh God, yeah, in your own head, you should probably feel like that? No, you wouldn't.
No.
You know, you'd be talking to yourself very differently. So it's that piece, isn't it?
But when you meet the person in the space, I think what changes is the person will say, look, I was a bit strong there now.
Yeah.
You know, they'll repair in their own way.
Yeah.
If you're open to creating the space to get to the conversation where we can repair.
Yeah.
And that's the piece around restorative practice that I love, is that it opens up the space to repair if people are willing to step into it.
And I think it happens indeed if we create this space. But what I'm always trying, not always, but what I'm often considering is even thinking relationally, whether I ever have it, there's no time, the bell's going to go, you know, we have a meeting, there's no minutes to do this. I still think thinking relationally has a huge balm on our own spirit sometimes, on my own story I'm telling myself. So I'm going home to bed, I'm thinking, so whether there's time or there isn't time, which is sometimes people, you know, suggest as a barrier, and I can see in context at times, and other times I think it makes things much more efficient. But it depends on what we're looking at. But we're talking about that way of being, so it's how we're living, you know. And there's 10 ways to invite someone to pick up a piece of paper, you know, or to invite them to have a meeting. You know, you can shove it in the diary and say they have to come, or you can ask them. So we were chatting about this earlier on, but it's just that idea of that all day, every day kind of piece, but. The time, I think thinking relationally is something I don't do every day. And when I'm tired, it's harder. When I'm wounded in a space in the past, it's even harder again. But it's a conscious intention. So like, who do I want to be in this situation? Brené Brown's lovely ones, you know, what's the most generous assumption I can make? Am I contributing more than I criticize here? You know, there's those little thinking routines that I find helpful for myself, you know?
I love that you're saying that.
I think there's a gift in those. And I think it is about, I mean, thinking relationally is just, it's a practice.
It's intentional practice. It's an intentional practice.
I love it.
Because our brains are wired, as we know, to protect us. So it won't get to that. It will get to what's the worst case scenario. Who's the biggest baddie here in hell? We protect ourselves. So we have to counter that, you know.
Yeah, and our ego will help us kind of see, you know, get into that cross space faster. So we have to say, okay, ego, thank you, not now. Taking that on board. And just because we're so, sometimes there is that piece about saying, I need to be seen to be the winner in this engagement, and you know, everybody loses once one person takes that stance. So because even if you win the argument, you lose the relationship, you break the trust. If you're in that win over you kind of way of being.
I said to my sister last week, she told me to stop talking about her in workshops, but like Laura, like we're very close, you know. But do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And she said both. I'll be happy and I'm right. But I think it's that idea. What's our intention here? You know, it's really key. And I always think about school leaders, or indeed, you know, sometimes the armoured space in the classroom where we're so worried because we're supposed to be in control. We think we're supposed to be in control. A school leader, that the bit of loneliness in that space, you know, because then who will I be undefended to? Who has my role here that understands the pressure of these decisions? And so, you know, that's a big challenge, you know, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it can be lonely, and sometimes you carry pieces that you can't share, and you have to make decisions that people won't understand.
They won't understand.
And you need to rely on their trust that you are a good custodian in that space.
Exactly.
And sometimes people have that and sometimes people don't. So it's a tough space. It's a tough space.
This isn't something, that I can share, but you'd hope that you'd trust to know that I'm always looking at the needs of the community, or that what's guiding me here is what's the best for us as a community. And that happens, and it can be damaged quickly, and it can happen over a long period of time. Yeah. That's nice, yeah.
Will you tell us a little bit about your event coming up?
Listen, Niamh, I'll tell you Patricia very, very generously has agreed to share her big heart and her wisdom in the space, and I wanted to create an opportunity. So it kind of iterated from the idea of a conference, okay, but it's a walking conference in nature. And the theme is RP, but it's the RP of rest and play. And so we're going to try and offer that embodiment in this space. It's in Belmont, in Bray. The trees, the birdsong, nature, and we're going to rest in ourselves and nature and play, hopefully in community. And the wonderful Patricia is going to share her insights around. Do you want to share?
I guess what I want to have a conversation about is about being kind and being almost restorative to ourselves.
Exactly.
You know, that sort of being gentle with ourselves and understanding the way that we're talking about ourselves and minding ourselves and looking after ourselves is really important for how we'll radiate that out for our practice with others. So I do think I'm really interested in this graciousness and kindness piece. Because we're doing so much talking about it and a lot of not doing it. So I kind of want us to feel okay about that.
I didn't want to go and do an event to talk about it. I wanted us to live it. And Grattan Donnelly is another one of our keynote speakers. I've done work with him this year. And he's a leadership coach, really into sustainability and mindfulness and presence. So we'll have great fun, tea, and the hope is that you might come with a team. I'd love people to come with a team or a community, you know, colleagues, a team, and it's a fundraiser for Build for the Boys. So they're two young boys living with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is a life-limiting condition, and they need a bit of support around trying to adapt their home so they can kind of live with dignity and you know to the fullest of their potential in their home. So that's the hope, is that people will come and support the boys and hopefully have a great. I promise there'll be a bit of sunshine. I promise you. 14th of September, and you'll see it on my website. So it's the Connector P conference. The walking conference. Thanks, Steve. Yeah. I need you in my life full time. Right.
And we put it in our show notes.
Brilliant. We'll have one. We're going to have a brilliant. It'll be a great event. A great day.
I'm really looking forward to it because it'll be just a day of presence.
Exactly.
Not presence as in like unwrapping, but actually just being. That's just that space, and a great way to begin the academic year.
That's a restorative return to school. That was the idea.
Really like that.
So come, we'll have fun.
The outdoor pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, not a treat. Like
It sounds like an amazing place. I can't wait to see it. Yeah.
And I've loved chatting with you two here.
No, it's been amazing.
Thank you.
Absolutely
so
amazing.
Much.
I just feel when I'm in your presence, there is a very restorative feeling. I really needed this today. I really just wanted to. I was so looking forward to seeing you.
Yeah.
I got confused and thought it was last week and probably scared the bejesus. But anyway. but it just is when you're with you. You just have that sense that you really live this, and that it's not something outside of you, but it's very much a values based who you are and leading who you are. So I've loved every second of being in your company in your amazing home, and I just needed it. I just have to say that to you. It's given me back something huge to be in your company today.
I really loved it too. I have. The two you're gorgeous.
Oh, no, thank you.
But I love listening to your podcast, you know, when I'm driving in the car. So it was a real honour to get to share the space with you. Thanks so much.
Will you listen to yourself? I hate listening to myself. Will you listen to this?
I will.
Excellent.
I will. Like
glad
this.
it's over because I've been so looking forward to this day.
I think this is one of those to be continued. I think we're going to. I think our paths are going to stay.
Anytime, anywhere, come with tea, and I'd love to continue our chats. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Michelle.
Brilliant.
Thank you.